Lately, a lot of people are complaining about remakes and how bad they suck. Myself included. A lot. Do you ever think about why they suck? Is it a lack of respect for the source material? Is it a failure to understand the original movie's underlying message? Maybe it's the worst possible jacket you could put onto a gangly 6'4" actor. Where did they even get all of the Fozzie Bear dolls to make it for him with? Or is it something deeper than the world's worst, least appropriate wardrobe choice ever made in a film? Grab yourself a drink, preferably not plant-based. They're not actually good for you if you really look into it. But you do you. I think 1994's The Crow should have stayed in 1994. I think the 2024 remake sucks, and today I'm going to show you why.
To me, and a lot of other folks obviously, The Crow is more than just a movie. It's a cultural touchstone and a gothic masterpiece that was, in a lot of ways, uniquely 90s. Visually, it was distinct. The themes of love transcending death were universal and timeless, and that gave the story an emotional core. It didn't replicate James O'Barr's graphic novel source material, but it did select all the right elements from it to convey the story authentically. Fast forward to 2024. Director Rupert Sanders tried to recapture The Crow's elusive essence. Sanders also brought us Snow White and the Huntsman and Ghost in the Shell, both of which were respectable films, but in catering to modern sensibilities, this Crow remake fails to capture almost any of what made the original what it was, and for some, what it still is.
So let's swoop in and see why Brandon Lee's Eric Draven casts a shadow these remakes will never rise above. Not even the 6'4" ones.
Popcorn, is that your favorite?
The Crow by Alex Proyas tells a simple, fast-paced, emotionally charged story. Eric Draven, a rock musician, is resurrected to avenge the brutal murders of himself and his fiancée Shelley, and we're along for the ride to watch his relentless and methodical pursuit of the murderous perpetrators.
It's a tale of love and loss and vengeance, and it's told with a simple, striking clarity.
In contrast with the 2024 remake, director Rupert Sanders either felt he had to put his name on the film by adding an elaborate, extraneous backstory, or he thought the original plotline was just too simple. Either way, he threw in complexity with a demonic antagonist named Vincent, played by Danny Houston, whom I love. Then he added to the complexity by expanding Eric and Shelley's romance. Now, this could have been effective if he made them likable or even just relatable, but in not doing that, the emotional core at the heart of this story gets lost in the additional subplots.
Now, complexity in and of itself is fine. It can even make an otherwise boring story more interesting. But without strong, clearly written lead characters for us to follow, all the additional elements can jumble the narrative coherence, or in elaborate film school terminology, make the story all shitty.
In terms of themes, the original examined grief, injustice, and redemption. Those themes resonated with audiences because the plot's simplicity tied them all together in a tidy little brooding package. But the remake's themes are muddled and tangled by these additional elements. Eric's humanity drove the original plot. We felt he deserved vengeance because in his situation, we would want vengeance too. But the remake's decision to focus on Eric and Shelley's appearances and lifestyle choices took all the drive out of the story, making the couple spineless, drug-addled, freeloading career criminal fashionistas frequenting nightclub hotspots makes it very challenging to get behind either of them even briefly, let alone for an entire runtime. And if you can't connect with a movie's narrative and themes, you better hope the tone and the atmosphere makes up for it. The Crow oozes dark gothic atmosphere. Its rain-soaked urban landscapes and shadowy alleys and grungy, somber aesthetics are hauntingly immersive.
I think the term haunting is way overused in film criticism, but sometimes it's the right word.
The movie feels just like the graphic novel feels. It's like the books come to life and every frame of the movie is dripping in its blackened mood. The remake attempts a modernized Gothic style, but the result feels disjointed because the two aesthetics are fundamentally in opposition, and that means they don't mix very well. The Crow had grit and grime and substance everywhere, but the remake feels sanitized from its crystal clear definition to the excessive fake tattoos.
This is a wicked example of just how much tone and atmosphere can support or totally cripple a story.
It's kind of like replicating a hand-painted classical work of art with an AI text-generated rendition of it.
It just feels false. And don't even get me started on the soundtrack. It's too late. You got me started on the soundtrack.
The Crow's soundtrack is legendary, with bands like The Cure and Nine Inch Nails and Stone Temple Pilots and even frickin' Joy Division. These bands and their specific songs capture the film's dark, moody tone perfectly. Graham Revell's score drapes the story in a dense, postmodern melancholy, and that helps amplify every one of the story's emotional beats. The remake's contemporary soundtrack is... well, it's fine, but fine just isn't enough when the original's music defined the film's atmosphere. Without that distinct sound, the remake feels like a hollow impersonation. So much so that this movie's got a frickin' Joy Division song too. Of course, you can argue music is subjective, and I'd absolutely agree with you, but you know yourself, if a movie gets the music and the score right, the genre and the era of the songs fall away and cease to matter.
When a song has been picked and placed perfectly, it carries you through that scene. And a great way to gauge if it's been done properly, you end up popping out to the record store to buy an album from a band you've never heard of before. You might also end up declaring one of the cast members your new favorite actor, depending, of course, on their performance.
FKA Twig's performance didn't do much for me, but it doesn't really matter. This story's about Eric Draven. I am a fan of Bill Skarsgård, however. From villains to Pennywise to Barbarian, the guy can act. He commits to his roles, and he definitely committed to this remake.
But Brandon Lee is Eric Draven, and as far as I am concerned, Brandon Lee is the only Crow.
Lee's performance was widely acclaimed for its depth and intensity. He blended warmth with affection and fury and menace. He was raw and emotional and unforgettable. For those of us not in the business of making money off of movies anyway. His death during the filming of The Crow only deepened the movie's poignancy, and given how unique and unlikely these circumstances were, I've always believed they should have immortalized Lee's portrayal and at least retired the Draven character if they insisted on keeping the franchise going. As I said, to Bill's credit, he delivered a committed performance in the remake, but even his natural intensity couldn't overcome the film's lackluster character development. The original Eric Draven was simultaneously human and haunting.
I've said haunting twice now in a single video.
And that's a balance the remake fails to achieve. Skarsgård's Draven possesses nothing to qualify him as heroic. He shies away from conflict with people half his size. He seems permanently scarred and emotionally crippled by the death of a horse from his childhood. He remained confined within an institution he's apparently possessed the ability to escape for years. He fails to stand up for himself at all in life, and that makes you question how or why he earned the opportunity to stand up for himself in death. As audience members, we need something to latch onto with our lead characters, and this rendition of Eric Draven doesn't offer a whole lot worth grabbing. Alex Proyas's direction in 1994 was revolutionary. He created a gritty, living world using miniatures and practical effects and imaginative production designs. Visually speaking, Proyas's styles draw comparisons to movies like Tim Burton's Batman and even Blade Runner. It's far more foreboding than it is pretty or even attractive. The remake updates the visuals for the digital age, but as always, something's lost in that translation. It is crisp and highly polished, but that polishing washes away any of the immersive depth of the original dystopian cityscape. It's like hosing down your barbecue every time you cook ribs on it.
Or, if you're vegan, cucumbers. I'm inclusive.
The pair's dress like Zoolander extras. They frequent ritzy apartments and fancy nightclubs, somehow without any money, and they end up coming off more like runway models than outcasts. Their appearances and daily routines after escaping the institution bear little resemblance to the penniless, desperate fugitives we're meant to believe they are, and that amplifies the already muddled narrative. Given it's failed on so many fronts already, it is not hard to figure out why it also failed on what I think is the most important one. The Crow emerged at a time when alternative subcultures like goth and punk and grunge were growing in popularity and shifting towards the mainstream. The movie's dark aesthetics and anti-establishment tones resonated with a lot of people who were growing disillusioned with the same old Hollywood stuff. Eric Draven,
Brandon Lee's Eric Draven,
embodied a brooding, vengeful anti-hero archetype that contrasted perfectly with the usual clean-cut heroes of the time. And on top of that, he also appealed to fans of gothic literature and fans of alternative music, and even folks who simply related to the idea of a misunderstood outsider. But most importantly, I think there's a sincerity in The Crow that comes from a very real place. If you don't know already, James O'Barr created the source material graphic novel as a way to help him cope with his own personal tragedy.
His fiancée was killed by a drunk driver, and he poured all of the emotion of that tragedy into the pages of The Crow, and you could feel that in the film.
In the remake, you can feel somebody trying to make a profit. And you can feel that because, unfortunately, modern Hollywood is forcing us to become experts on that subject. The best writers in show business have trouble penning that sort of raw authenticity into anything. And that's why The Crow went on to gain its current cult status. Brandon Lee's death immortalized him as a tragic figure. His image in that film went on to become iconic globally. Despite several attempts to keep the franchise going, they have all fallen short of the original because that original motivation just wasn't there. In the 1990s, The Crow was a revelation. The 2024 remake is a competent film, technically speaking, but it has no resonance or relevance in terms of culture or legacy. It feels more like a product of the moment, which is the opposite of a timeless classic. Some movies do suit a sequel, and some movies can support several sequels. We all know that, but a lot of movies are best left undisturbed. And for all the reasons I've just mentioned, I think The Crow is one of them.
If you're still here, thank you very much for hanging out. If you've got any thoughts on The Crow or The Crow remake, I would love to hear about them down in the comments section. As always, thank you very much for watching my little video, and until next time, folks.